Hello, welcome to Heady Remarks. Long time no see. I'm going to talk today about the various Catholic Inquisitions. And I kind of tried something new this time. I'm going to try not to take forever. I'm going to try to go faster, not make it 3 hours long. I mostly try to learn about these through, his name's Thomas Madden. Is that right? Thomas Madden. Thomas F. Madden. He had it's called Heaven or Heresy. Sort of trying to dispel some of the myths about the Spanish Inquisition seems to get it really the worst. I think a lot of the witch hunts going on in like Germany and England and the Netherlands, a lot of the stuff that went on during those gets sort of misplaced on the Spanish Inquisition. And this is my banana duck. Archie's over there in the armchair. He didn't want to join me, I guess, but he might come over a little later, like he does. It's a banana and a duck. So I liked it when I saw that and needed it. Unfortunately, it's shaped like a banana, so he doesn't really stand up straight. Okay, anyway, moving on. So I found this thing online called Visme. I think that's how it's pronounced. God, I haven't done this in so long. I don't even remember how to do it. Present, share screen. Also share tab audio. Oh, that's automatically on. Smart. Good update. That one. Yeah. So there you go. It's like a PowerPoint, but online. So yeah, medieval, Spanish, and Roman are kind of the three main categories, I guess. This is his little introduction. For many, the Inquisition conjures Gothic images of cloaked figures and barbarous torture chambers, so enmeshed in this view of the Inquisition in popular culture that such scenes play out even in comedies such as Mel Brooks' History of the World and Monty Python's Flying Circus. But is this a fair portrayal? And how was the Inquisition perceived in its own time? And yeah. I do still have my crazy notes that are always chaotic, but I don't know. I'll sort of try to stick to this. Okay, moving on. The picture on here is a picture of an auto de fe, which means act of faith in Spanish. And it was it wasn't just public executions. It was also when they would hand out penances, or it was just a big public spectacle, I guess. But they were not very common. So the Catholic Church released a lot. It was very well documented, these inquisitions, and in the 90s they released a lot of documents that sort of revealed that a lot of the impressions that we had been given about Catholic Inquisitions were not really how they were in reality. So yeah, there's been revisionists at work trying to set the record straight, I guess. This is another auto de fe, I guess. So yeah, medieval goes from 1184 to 1230s. Oh, I don't know what you mean. Hey, it's Evan. Did I name him Evan? I should name him that. Spanish, 1478 to 1834. Okay, so going on for hundreds of years. Portuguese, I'm probably not going to talk a lot about that one just because, I don't know, it doesn't seem to get talked about a lot. But that was from 1536 to 1821. And then the Roman Inquisition goes from 1542 to 1859. And yes, some of them kind of overlap with each other, as you can see there. Medieval. So, yeah, like it says here, there's the Episcopal from 1184 to the 1230s, and then Papal, which went on during the 1230s. Heresy was considered an offense against the state after religion and government started becoming more like one and the same thing. The first medieval Inquisition, the Episcopal Inquisition, was established in the year 1184 by a papal bull of Pope Lucius III entitled Ad Abolendum, for the purpose of doing away with. They were going after the Cathars, from a Greek word meaning the pure ones, a movement in southern France, also known as the Albigensians. The Cathars were known as Albigensians because of their association with the city of Albi, and because the 1176 Church Council, which declared the Cathar doctrine heretical, was held near Albi. The condemnation was repeated through the Third Lateran Council of 1179. And then, yeah, mainly those two groups, it was the Cathars and the Waldensians, considered heretics. Unlike the haphazard episcopal methods, the Papal Inquisition was thorough and systematic. So I guess that's when they started sort of getting their act together, getting more organized. Crap, I should have grabbed my earbuds. Some of the few documents from the Middle Ages involving first-person speech by medieval peasants come from the Papal Inquisition records. Okay, I kind of want to read a little bit before I go forward of this, a little more of a introduction from Thomas Madden. He goes, before discussing an institution like the Inquisition, we must first have some understanding of the framework in which it existed. The organization of the church or ecclesiology is crucial to that understanding. When the church was founded by Christ, he gave to his 12 apostles certain authority and powers to lead. In the first decades of the church, the general expectation was that Christ would be returning soon. In other words, that the church was a short-term proposition. As the first generation of Christians began to die, it became increasingly clear that the church needed some form of organization. The apostles who had left Judea and founded Christian communities generally acted as overseers. Through a ritual of laying on of hands, the apostolic power was given to successors or overseers for other large communities. The overseers or bishops were therefore the direct successors of the apostles. Bishops had the authority to ordain priests who could perform the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of the Mass, but who could not themselves ordain new priests. With the passing of the apostles and the first generation of Christian missionaries, the question naturally arose as to where authority lay when disputes about doctrine arose. This was particularly pressing in light of the proliferation of Gnostic challenges to orthodoxy. Ignatius of Antioch, who succeeded St. Peter as Bishop of Antioch and probably knew him, insisted that the bishop held the same apostolic authority to interpret scripture and judge the truth. This was not novel, but a statement of a widely accepted view. By the 3rd century AD, bishops in provincial capitals or metropolitans were recognized as having oversight authority over other bishops in that same province. These came to be known as archbishops. Similarly, the archbishops of the 3 largest cities in the Roman Empire, Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria, were generally accepted as having jurisdiction that extended beyond their provinces. These 3 patriarchates were subsequently approved at the Council of Nicaea in 325. Within these 3, the Bishop of Rome had several claims to preeminent authority over the whole Catholic Church. Rome had been sanctified by the lives, deaths, and mortal remains of Saints Peter and Paul. More importantly, according to the Gospel of Matthew 16:18 through 19, chapter 16, verses 18 and 19, Christ had specifically singled out Peter as the rock on which he would build his church and gave to him special binding and loosing authorities. Although bishops generally saw themselves as independent, they also accepted some measure of authority that came from Rome. In the 90s AD, the Bishop of Rome, Clement, could write to the Christian communities of Corinth, reproving them for their actions and ordering them to restore their deposed bishop and clergy. A few decades later, Irenaeus of Lyons wrote of the necessity of all communities everywhere to be in accord and communion with Rome. By the mid-4th century, after the conversion of Emperor Constantine, popes were men of great importance who had solid control over the church in the West. After the fall of the empire in 476, however, the pope was placed in a position in which he had to take over responsibility for Rome and much of Italy. He was also the head of the only intact Roman organization in Europe. In the new capital of the empire, Constantinople, a new patriarch chafed at the pronouncements of Roman popes. After the Muslim conquests of most of the Christian world, in the 7th century, the church began to coalesce around two poles, Rome in the west and Constantinople in the east. Okay. I thought that was going to be something else a little bit, but basically just trying to understand, like, you can't really judge what was going on back then by current times. Obviously, you have to sort of open your mind to a different way of how things were, of thinking. Like, overwhelmingly, people supported the Inquisitions. They were into it. They were okay with it. They were like, yeah, get rid of, it was considered a sickness in the body of Christ, heresy, for people to be spreading incorrect doctrine or trying to pull people away from, faith and being like homogenous. So they wanted to be all together and acting together, which I guess is hard when at some point you had like 3 popes at one point. At one point there was 2 popes that both excommunicated each other. I gotta grab these. Hold on. Where are those? I just had to grab these for the video. Where's the plug? Dang. I'm like running out of places to plug it in. Always forget something, don't I? I wonder if it'll work if I plug it in here. Actually, I'll do it here. Dang it. Sorry. Okay. So I just found a couple clips of like this guy talking. I hope it works.
In the later part of the 12th century, some of these new groups, which rejected the clergy and the sacraments of the church, became influenced by dualist doctrines from the East, which granted that our world, the material world, was either the product of the devil, who was a lesser being than God, or alternatively, that there were 2 gods, each of equal power, and that the material world was the product of the evil God. For these groups, human souls were imprisoned in the flesh by the evil God, and only through absolute mortification of the flesh might the soul escape the endless cycle of reincarnation.
Yeah.
Now, these beliefs
Gnosticism.
might sound rather strange, but they weren't particularly abnormal in the ancient world, nor in the world of the East. And some of these groups set up their own equivalent to the clergy, often known as the good men, or the perfecti, the perfects, men and women who were considered to live pure lives and could preach and could perform their own rituals, considered to bring spiritual benefits, the most important of which was
Hi, Broken 76. Good to see you.
This is actually one of the, on your left, the rare depictions we have now of the Cathars at work. The consolamentum, a form of baptism in which the perfect laid his or her hands on the believer, by which the soul of the believer was considered united with its heavenly spirit.
Talking about the Cathars.
After this, the most important ritual was the melioramentum, whereby the believer knelt down before the good man, the perfect, 3 times and said, "Bless us, have mercy upon us." Now, numerically, these groups were the strongest group of heretics, and they're especially active in the southern region of France. This isn't the best map ever, but the southern region of France and the northern part of Italy. Why these areas? It's not coincidental that these 2 areas where you see them most active are also the areas where there is no central authority, where Christian kings are almost inactive. There isn't a force there to stop the heretics. So the Cathars are considered the greatest threat to the church. But I also want to mention this other group, the Valdensians, the followers of Valdez, a lay businessman from the French city of Lyon, who did not advocate extremist beliefs to the extent of the Cathars, and was much closer to the Catholic Church. So for this reason, Valdez is often compared to his contemporary, St. Francis of Assisi, but they're actually quite different characters. In fact, St. Francis of Assisi was extraordinarily orthodox. We know from the sources at the time that no heretic would go near Francis of Assisi. Whereas Valdez, in his way, was quite subversive because he insisted on preaching doctrine when the church forbade him from doing so, as he was not a cleric and had no training, and could thus, for all of his enthusiasm, lead people into error. Valdez and his supporters, too, questioned the efficacy of the sacraments in the hands of an unworthy minister.
I was just going to say, the other thing is, they took religion very seriously, obviously, and they considered, the goal of the Inquisition was to save souls, from hell, and that it wasn't to punish, it was to correct people who had misunderstandings about, the gospel, and to save souls. The Gnostics called the Jewish God of the Old Testament the Demiurge, based on the differences in personality between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I can kind of understand why. Yeah, I mean, it is a little confusing. Yeah, I have somewhere in my notes, I have something about that. Where did I put that? It's like control find Jehovah. Yeah, the evil God was Jehovah and the good God was Yahweh. Interesting.
Minister, and he and his followers rejected absolutely the taking of oaths, which may not sound like much, except for the society of the Middle Ages. The society they were living in was in large measure constructed on the taking of oaths. So in this respect,
So here I highlighted the Gnostics, who claimed to have secret knowledge of Christ's teaching not given to common people. As Irenaeus wrote, it was the bishops who were the successors of the apostles. Several potent heresies threatened the Catholic Church during its first several centuries. Gnosticism, which is a blanket term for several beliefs that were believed to be secret knowledge, was particularly prevalent in the East. All of them insisted on the evil or irrelevant nature of the material world. Some believed that asceticism, mortification, which I had to look that up. It means discipline of the body and appetites by self-denial or self-inflicted privation. And celibacy were necessary because this would reduce connections to the natural world and avoid enslaving more souls. Others believed that people should engage in whatever practices they chose without restrictions because this world was unimportant or depraved. Gnostic dualism led some sects to conclude that the God of the Old Testament was not the same as the Father of Jesus in the New Testament. The Old Testament God of the Jews was foolish or evil, while the New Testament God of Jesus was good and loving.
Waldensians were just as much trouble as the Cathars. Now, because history is about trying to look at things from everybody's point of view, it's certainly the case, of course, that the people who we call Cathars and the Waldensians, they did not consider themselves as heretics. It's very rarely the case that people actually say that they are heretics. They considered that they held the genuine path to salvation, and that the church did not. And they are often very sincere in their beliefs, and many of the perfects have a reputation for austerity. Now, for most people, of course, who are not clerics and were not Cathars and were not Waldensians, the evidence suggests that where the Cathars were concerned, then there was often a very great deal of hostility towards them, and they were viewed as a menace, and they were treated violently by the general population. With the Waldensians, it was a little different. People often really couldn't distinguish them from other Christians and couldn't really see that they were doing very much wrong. Now, from the viewpoint of the church, from the Pope, the bishops, and the clergy, they have an overwhelming responsibility for the salvation of souls. They were burdened with the duty of getting everybody to heaven and saving them from hell. And it should be said here that somebody who undermined another person's beliefs was not just a light nuisance. They were seen as something equivalent to the way in which we might see terrorists now. You know, people absolutely placing themselves outside of society, spreading fear inside society, and ultimately bent on destroying society.
Terrorists of the soul. Oh, that's the end of that clip. And then I had the link to the Albigensian Crusade. We're already 24 minutes in, and we're still stuck in the medieval. But this part's kind of interesting, so I'm just going to play another.
And he called a crusade against Raymond's land, since he was a protector of heretics. And this was, at this stage, it was a whole new world, because knights often went off on crusades to the Holy Land to fight against the Muslims. But now they were being...
I don't know why I do this to myself. I'm like, oh, let's just do like all of the Inquisitions instead of just focusing on one or something. But I don't know. That's what this thing I listened to was about, was like, it separated it into those three, the medieval, Spanish, Roman.
Being asked to fight against an enemy inside Christian lands. And the knights responded to this call with great enthusiasm, which brought with it a remission of the temporal punishment due to the sins of their past life. Now, I should explain here the tactics of the Crusaders. The tactic of the Crusader was to give the people of the south of France the most brutal example imaginable of what would happen to them if they resisted the crusade. And at the city of Béziers, much of... Do I have the city of Béziers? There we are. At the city of Béziers, much of the population was massacred. And it seemed very little distinction was made as to whether the people were Catholics or Cathars. Indeed, it was a little later reported that the Crusade's spiritual leader, the Cistercian abbot Arnaud Amalric, was asked at the time how such a distinction was to be made between the Catholics and the heretics, and responded, "Slay them. God will know those who are his." Now, whether he said that or not, the essential tactic of the Crusades was to terrify everybody into submission. And to some extent, this tactic worked. Many of the towns surrendered. Here is the town of Carcassonne, with the people leaving, carrying nothing but their sins, as one of the chronicles put it. And many towns handed over those who were considered heretics to be burned. But the appointed military leader of the crusade, the knight Count Simon de...
Oh yeah, so the reason they burned them was because you got to separate the wheat from the chaff, and in the Bible, the chaff was burned, so that's why they burned them. But for what it's worth, unless you were totally unrepentant, they would like strangle you from afar before you actually got burnt. They'd have a rope around your neck, and I don't know if that was just with the Spanish. Might have been all of them. So that was
Montfort
nice.
Had the greatest difficulty in sustaining pressure against any resistance because of the nature of medieval warfare. That is to say, the knights who were with Simon de Montfort had to serve during a certain number of days. And after they had served those certain number of days, they received the spiritual rewards that they had on offer from the Pope. And that when they'd done that, they went home. This meant that the crusade would advance, would besiege a castle. They would have the castle at the point of surrender. And at this point, many of the knights would just leave. And the Count Simon de Montfort would then have to retreat. And this dramatically lengthened the extent of the crusade. But the other problem was that the crusade was in an area of interest to many of the Christian kings of Europe. In a sense,
Padfa says they generally hung witches and heretics in England, I believe. Yeah, the witch hunts in like England and Germany and Netherlands and stuff are kind of similar, but kind of different. But like specifically with this heretic thing, where they're like, you know, again, it was really pretty rare. Like the numbers of deaths are really exaggerated, but I'm saying that not including really like the witch hunts and stuff. So I don't know. I think they do sort of get combined together in people's minds a lot.
Hence, the assassination of the papal legate is like the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand at the beginning of the First World War. Everybody has a political interest in the region. The kings of England and France, the German emperor, the kings of Castile and Aragon, and this sets in motion a major European war. The person who has most interest in the south of France is actually not the king of France, but the king of Aragon, who's built up all this influence in the lands of the south of France during a long period. And the Count of Toulouse, nearly all of whose lands are being taken by Simon de Montfort, is the brother-in-law of Peter II, the King of Aragon, who intervenes militarily to protect his lands and his family, but is defeated and killed in battle by Simon de Montfort. A little afterwards, Simon de Montfort is himself killed while besieging Toulouse. And at this point, the French crown itself has begun to seriously intervene and to take control of the region and incorporate it into France, as happened in 1229, when the crusade was finally ended by treaty. So the modern country of France is very much formed in these years. They take the lands of Normandy from the English, and they take all these lands in the south from Aragon, and France as we know it today is in large measure formed at this time. And so the crusade has been a great success for the French crown, but it's not really been a success for the church. Some of the protectors of heretics have lost their lands. Some of the heretics have been cut down or burned. But the reality was that the manner of the crusade and the treatment of the people had stiffened the resistance of many people and made them think less of the church than they did before. The crusade had defeated some heretics, but it had created new ones. And the new ones were much better organized than the old ones. And the church had lost control of the process which had been started by Pope Lucius III and needed to re-establish control so that instead of a military campaign controlled by knights, there was to be a spiritual campaign controlled by clergy.
There you go. They're like, maybe crusades are not so much the way to go. And there's some of the heresies here. I didn't put this on the list, but I was just looking here. There's one called Montanism that kind of reminded me of Mormons, LDS Church, because it was like they were continuing Revelation, which is, I guess, it was supposed to have stopped at some point, but But yeah, it's sort of interesting. It says Montanism grew out of the spiritual experiences of a second century convert to Christianity, Montanus, and two female companions, Prissa, sometimes called Priscilla, and Maximia. Can't hear myself. The three began to travel across Asia Minor in the 170s with ecstatic prophecies. Because they held their prophecies to have greater authority than the Gospels, they were condemned. Nevertheless, their prophecies were collected, and a schismatic Montanist church spread and would remain for centuries. And then down here I wrote, the Cataphrygian heresy or new prophecy taught that the Holy Spirit was continuing to give new revelation through Montanus and his followers, and Jesus would soon bring New Jerusalem to a place in Phrygia. I don't know where that is. Montanism flourished in Carthage under the leadership of Tertullian in the 3rd century. Okay, anyway, that's just another heresy. But here's these ones. Paulicians. I was really interested in the heretics, but there's quite a few of them. The Paulicians believed there are two principles, an evil god known as the Demiurge, kind of similar, to the other Gnostics, and a good god. The former is the ruler of this world, and the latter of the world to come. From this, they deduced that Jesus did not take on human flesh because the good God could not have become human. Oh yeah, and it was like they were saying that if he's God, he couldn't have taken on human flesh because that's like evil and of the material fleshy world. And some of them would even say that it was like people would be like, well, then how was he walking around talking to people? And they're like, it was just like an illusion. He appeared to have taken flesh, but it was like, if you tried to touch him, your hand would go right through him. And I'm like a hologram? Bluebeam, Project Bluebeam. Okay, and then there's the Bogomils, based on a dualistic cosmology, was that the visible material world was created by the devil. This is a very, very common situation with this material world stuff. Thus, they denied the doctrine of the incarnation and rejected the Christian conception of matter as a vehicle of grace. I just skipped Cathars and Waldensians because I have other spots for that. Based heretics. Yeah, I guess. Lollards. England's first heresy. Lollards challenged the practice of clerical celibacy. Oh, they challenged the celibacy. And believed priests should not hold government positions, as such temporal matters would likely interfere with their spiritual mission. Oh, yeah, and Lollards is like a derogatory term. It means mumblers, but that's what we know them as now. And then there was the Hussites. Like, each of these are a whole other subject. Leader was Jan Hus, who was in the way of reuniting the church from the schism. Oh, he was in the way of it. They considered him in the way of, they were trying to unite everyone again, and he's in the way. Forerunner to the Protestant Reformation. I'm probably mispronouncing all sorts of stuff. The Hussite Wars was going on in Czech, the Bohemian Church. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going. Hurry up. Cathars, we already saw that picture. oh God, it was Greek for the pure ones, also known as Albigensians. I'm spending too much time on this. The Cathar clergy were known as perfecti, and believers were credentes. There was also a third group of sympathizers who were nominally Catholic. Men and women served as perfecti, who practiced abstinence, vegetarianism, and lived in poverty, standing in stark contrast to the Catholic clergy. Their beliefs are thought by some scholars to have influenced the development of the French poetic genre of courtly love, as they were associated with two women integral to that form, Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie de Champagne. They were suppressed by the church through the Albigensian Crusade. All right, we get it. What is this?
Catharism was a dualist heresy. It came out of earlier heresies, particularly Manichaeism and Bogomilism, and it took root in southern France. It was always a very small minority of the people who lived in southern France in the Middle Ages, but it became a particularly well-organized heresy and one that caused a lot of problems.
I don't know how to enlarge
The basic
this
idea of the heresy was that the universe was itself a kind of a battleground between a good God and an evil God. Yahweh was the good God.
I guess we kind of already covered
spirit,
this.
And Jehovah, who was the God of the Old Testament, was the evil God.
Yeah.
He had created the world and the material world and all that was in it.
Right.
And the battle was between matter, which was evil, and spirit, which was good. And throughout the history of the universe, the evil God would trap spirits, souls, into bodies and would put them onto the earth. And our job in life then is to achieve perfection.
Lives.
And when you achieve perfection, you will then transcend this physical matter world and you will go back to the spiritual world. And if you don't do it in one life, you are reborn over and over again. Now, Catharism naturally was very hostile to the Catholic Church. Cathars believed that Jesus, when he came, was a phantom. He was not physical, and that he preached this truth about the need to essentially live a very ascetic lives, one where you reduce your matter. So you reduce your matter by eating much less, so you become very skinny. You don't reproduce because that will just trap another soul. And the Catholic Church, which was created by the evil God, the Catholic Church then changed Jesus' message completely, and they said that he was physical and that he had actually died and resurrected, and that he had created the Mass in which he physically is present in the body, his body and blood, under the species of bread and wine.
You're eventually going to die out.
So this was naturally a problem. And the Inquisition, which had originally been created to deal with, for the most part, wayward heretics, those who had just simply stumbled into a heresy, had to start dealing with a new heretics in the late 12th and into the 13th century, these Cathars, who had not stumbled into it at all. They were very strongly opposed to the Catholic Church, and they were also underground. They were trying to hide the fact that they were Cathars. And the Inquisition, therefore, was dealing with that. The Inquisition that we think of then, today, of torture chambers and the rack and all of that, didn't really exist in the way that we think of it. Initially, it was done on a very local level by bishops and legal professionals, those who were trained in Roman law and theology. Eventually, it would be centralized more. In the 13th century, the popes began trying to bring the Inquisition into more of a centralized approach. So, for example, in 1231, Pope Gregory IX sent a letter to the prior of the Dominican convent in Regensburg, commissioning him as a judge delegate to travel wherever and to preach and to seek out heretics. And he told him that he could appoint others.
Okay, so I was just going to say, as far as torture, they used like strappado. Again, it was very rare. Strappado. The victim was lifted to the ceiling with his arms tied behind his back. The rack, the prisoner was tied to a frame, and the executioner pressed until the meat was pierced. I'm not sure that's correct, because when I was looking at the rack, the meat was pierced. It looked different. It looked like it was going to like dislocate. Because the rules are you cannot spill blood, you can't threaten loss of life or limb, and they always had a doctor present. Like, there were rules. There's also one that reminds me of waterboarding called the water cure. The prisoner was tied, a cloth was inserted through his mouth down his throat, and 1 liter jugs of water were poured into his mouth. And then I guess they would remove the rag and it would cause pain or something. There's another one that's not mentioned here that was even more rare, which was like burning the soles of their feet, the bottoms of their feet with heat, fire. I find the Spanish very, very interesting, especially here in Utah, says Broken76. The Spanish Utahns? I don't know if I see too many. I mean, a few, yeah. Oh, God, I'm still talking about this. The Waldensians. They always pronounce it like Valdensians. I have wealthy merchant seeking Peter Waldo. Wealthy merchant seeking a closer relationship with God based on Christ's teachings, gave away his wealth and preached a doctrine of simplicity, poverty, and service to others. Well, okay. Prior to distributing his wealth to the poor, he paid for the Bible to be translated into Provencal, his native language, and preached Christ's message directly from that work. Waldo and his followers condemned the worldly aspects of the church, most notably the donation of Constantine, which they felt contradicted Christ's teachings directly, as well as denying the validity of the sacraments, except for baptism and communion, the existence of purgatory and veneration of the saints and the Virgin Mary. When Waldo appealed to Pope Alexander III in 1179 for acceptance, he was not considered a heretic, but was discouraged from preaching. Afterwards, however, the Waldensians were condemned for their criticisms of the church, branded heretics, and fled to the mountains of Italy to escape persecution. Nope, Spanish from the Catholic Church in the late 1700s. Oh, I haven't looked into that too much. I don't really know why I added this, just to sort of give you an idea. It's just a short, quick little video of the Papal States, 1184 to 1239. Shows like... Oh, they got into England. Aragon. Okay, a whole page for that. Formal Inquisition. Oh, geez. All right, one more. Another video.
Same way.
Okay, so it was conducted by the Dominicans and the Franciscans, also called the Mendicant Order. I put this here because one of the punishments was to pin like a yellow cross to you. Because sometimes the, damn it, what's it called? Oh, I said the word earlier. Penance, I think that's what it's called. Like, was, you know, you had to publicly portray that you were a heretic. Sometimes it went on for the rest of your life, and sometimes it was just for a certain amount of time. And yeah, okay. So anyway, they were highly theologically trained. Oh, and persuasio is what they, I guess this is later, more kind of later. Or is that Latin? It was like what they just want to persuade you, that the goal is to persuade you to agree with them about the correct interpretation of church doctrine. Persuasio. Okay, moving on.
We do have a good idea from various manuals of instruction of how Inquisitions, generally speaking, were supposed to operate.
Okay, like the process
the Inquisitor would visit
organized.
a parish where heresy had been reported. He would first preach to the people concerning the crime of heresy. He would...
Hold on. Although the Inquisition was an instrument of the Catholic Church, it was an element of Roman law. The intersection of Catholicism and Roman legal practices has its beginning during the reign of the Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity in 311 AD. I don't know if I want to get into Donatism. And then there's Arianism. That's another heresy that held that Jesus Christ was less than God. And then it talks about the Ecumenical Council at Nicaea in 325, condemned Arianism and approved a Nicene Creed. Clergy were increasingly given civic positions and stipends, and the church was becoming closer to the state. Constantine decreed that heretics must leave the empire. For those who refused, other penalties such as confiscation of goods or death were possible. St. Augustine defended the idea that the state could play a role in the correction of heresy, and he would use something from Luke. It was about like some dinner that a master made, and the people he invited didn't show up to the dinner. I don't really understand how they translated this to like, we can do Inquisitions, but the people that were invited to the dinner, the banquet, didn't show up, and the master told his servant to just go out and grab whoever and have them come in. And somehow this was used to justify, I don't really get it, but in justifying the correction of heresy. It's called the parable of the banquet. Luke chapter 14, verse 21 to 24. To argue that those for whom the banquet had been prepared should be forced to come if necessary. That's not really what happened in the story, though. He told them to just go out and grab like beggars and whoever to like replace the people who didn't show up. Since Orthodox belief was now decreed by the Roman state, heretics were inherently treasonous. So it's treason. Scarlet letters for all. Yes. Yes. Shame. It was codified into Roman law. In 376, all meetings of heretics were outlawed. In the Code of Thessalonians of 453, heretics and pagans were equated with traitors. They were to have their property confiscated, their heirs deprived, and their lives taken. The Code of Justinian in 534 put forward a list of penalties not only for the heretic, but for those who supported, hid, or in any way helped him. It was tried using the same Roman legal methods current by the 4th century. This included an inquest or inquisitio. A magistrate investigated the evidence, called witnesses, prosecuted the case if necessary, and acted as judge. These were the first Inquisitions. The purpose of the procedure was to come to the truth. And for that reason, torture was applied in most cases. All right. So, yeah. If you were it was to make sure that what you said was true. If you said it under torture, but then, and it supposedly it only lasted for a few minutes at a time. But then if later you say like, no, I only said that because you were torturing me, they're like, all right, well, we got to do it again, I guess. Like they were trying to get you to say the same thing while not being tortured. I don't know. It doesn't seem very, very smart, but maybe sometimes it got people who didn't want to talk and whatnot. And Jack says, the Spanish Inquisition was the driving force to kicking the Moors out of Spain. My family took part of the Reconquista of New Mexico. Believe it or not, I will actually get to that in a minute eventually if I would hurry up.
Then
shut up.
declare a period of grace, which was usually a week, during which those guilty of heresy could make a voluntary confession. And if they told the full truth, they would be given penance. He might then call on particular individuals to be interrogated, or he might ask to interview everybody in the parish. Now, suspects were generally not told the names of those who had accused them, nor formally what they were accused of, nor in most cases were they given a lawyer to defend them. The questions they were asked were quite specific and in some senses for the historian frustratingly narrow, often concerned with the frequency with which the suspect may have associated with heretics, and then only sometimes about their actual practices and beliefs. Because often most of the questioning, the purpose of the questioning was to establish the extent of heresy and the names of the ringleaders among the heretics. If the suspect was found innocent, all well and good. If not, then there were a series of punishments depending upon the severity of involvement, and these were generally very carefully categorized. The penances would usually be read out loud in the local church. Now, this could range from fasting and additional church attendance to pilgrimage, either locally or to the great pilgrimage sites of Rome, of Canterbury, of Compostela, or in the Holy Land. The reconciled heretic, easily identifiable by the wearing of yellow crosses that were sewn onto their clothes. It could go further to imprisonment, which in the most severe cases could be solitary confinement and for life, until we come to the obdurate heretic, who would be handed over to the secular arm to be punished by the secular power and their properties confiscated. In the case of people who had already died, who were then found through investigation to have been guilty of heresy, they were condemned, and if possible, their bodies would be removed from consecrated ground and burned, and their houses.
Harsh. I cut it off. I think he said their houses were destroyed. Okay, moving on. Oh, Strapato. Ouch. He doesn't look happy. Yep. Wait, no, that's not Strapato. Sorry, that's the rack. All right, torture. Torture was much less common than in the secular courts. I don't know. I just get a lot of conflicting information. Doctor has to be present, only lasted a few minutes at a time, fire to the soul of face, stretching on the rack, cannot risk life or limb. I might have to skip some of this. If someone ends up imprisoned or killed, they consider that they have failed. The goal was not to, like I said, like 9 times out of 10, they were just like, no, this is actually this way. And the person was like, oh, my bad. And they're like, okay, bye. Stop telling people that. The Vatican said Tuesday that fewer witches were burned at the stake. Fewer witches were burned at the stake and fewer... what the heck? Fewer heretics tortured into conversion during the dark centuries of the Inquisition than is generally believed, but it also sought renewed forgiveness for sins committed by Roman Catholics in the name of church doctrine. In a statement, Pope John Paul II acknowledged that the Inquisition was widely viewed as one of the church's bleakest periods and that it loomed as a symbol of scandal. But he also asked, to what degree is that image faithful to reality? Before seeking forgiveness, it is necessary to have precise knowledge of the facts. To better understand the causes and damage of the Inquisition, the Vatican published a collection of scholarly essays on Tuesday about the Inquisition, stitched together from a 1998 symposium of leading theologians and scholars. 2 years after the symposium, the Pope made a sweeping apology for the Church's errors over the last 2,000 years. We cannot recognize the betrayal of the gospel committed by some of our We cannot not recognize the betrayal of the gospel committed by some of our brothers, especially in the second millennium, he said. The Inquisition is widely considered to be among the deepest of those betrayals. It began in 1231 resorting to torture and sentences of death, blah, 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 blah. I can't. This is taking too long. Okay, so this is just a list of some of the inquisitors. Bernard Guy was like a medieval, towards the late stage medieval. He wrote the Inquisitor's Handbook. He was born in Royeres, France in 1261 and entered the Order of Preachers at the age of 19. Whatever. Bernard Guy. Thomas de Torquemada. He's like the most famous Grand Inquisitor. He was during the Spanish Inquisition. He was accused of being like a crazy kind of psychopath murderer guy. But there's a lot of different opinions about him. He's a pretty controversial figure, I guess. Probably the most famous when it comes to like inquisitors and the whole Inquisition thing. Diego Rodriguez de Lucero was a priest and inquisitor of the Kingdom of Castile, based in Cordoba. Harsh and unjust persecutions created a reign of terror. According to William Thomas Walsh in his book Characters of the Inquisition, unlike Torquemada, this inquisitor actually did hate Jews. Thomas de Torquemada was actually, I think he was considered a converso because he was ethnically Jewish, but it was like his grandparents there are a lot of forced conversions. We're going to get into and Nicholas Emmerich was a Roman Catholic theologian, inquisitor. Anyway, we're going to get into the Spanish Inquisition now. I'm a little nervous about it. okay, I don't have time to read this, but it was like an example of Bernard Guy's inquisitorial technique, which is kind of funny. But we don't have time. All right. So I really wanted to play a video. I hope that like I won't get in trouble for it because it's what's his name? It's that Catholic guy who's like, I guess he's considered a no-no man. Shit, my brain isn't working. I can't remember his name. He's like kind of banned off the mainstream platforms. What the hell is his name? I'm scared. So the thing is, like, there's this whole thing with like, people seem to believe that, the Jews in Spain back in 7-11, going back in time again, there's the Muslim invasions in 7-11 where the Muslims came in and took over Spain, and people say that the Jewish people kind of betrayed the Visigoths and opened the gates, like threw open the gates. And there's a whole long thing about that I don't know if I have time for all this. Well, that's the Alhambra Decree. Where is it? There was someone who tried to find proof of that. Hold on. I'm going to try to find it. Stop sharing for a minute. Toledo. So, I guess I don't have this on. Did they or did they not open the gates? So this was someone who's trying to sort of get to the bottom of that. There has been a reluctance to realize the extent of the size and strength of the Jewish community in Visigothic Spain. Thompson writes that although they are mentioned all too often in the laws, they are not known to have been very numerous. 1983 Muslim conquest of Spain. They cannot be said to have occupied. They cannot be said to have occupied any very important position in the society of the kingdom. But if all that survives in abundance for this age is legislation, and the legislation indicates that the Jews were of great concern to some monarchs, perhaps the original assumption. So there were two assumptions. One is, did they open the gates or not? Seems like a lot of people believe that. And they claim that it was because the Visigoths mistreated them and passed anti-Jewish laws and stuff. But that might not entirely be true either. Like, it might not be true that they treated them all that bad. I suppose it's possible that they could have betrayed them even if they didn't treat them bad. So one could be true and the other not, and both could be true, or neither could be true. Great concern. There is a prevalent modern image of the passive and suffering Jew. Salo Baron labeled this theme the lachrymose conception of Jews and was upset with the eternal self-pity which he observed in Jewish historiography. I just really wanted to sort of get like a better understanding of why, because the Spanish Inquisition really focused for the most part on conversos. They were kind of forced into converting to Christianity, but then they were like not really believed to be sincere converts. And there's a lot of debate about whether they were or not. Like, some Jewish people are like, they kind of seem to like the idea of them secretly retaining their Jewishness, because it's like, it makes, because they were getting it from both sides. So like the Jews are like, oh, you like betrayed your religion. And then, the Christians are like, you're a fake Christian. Okay, so eternal self-pity, which he observed in Jewish historiography. Historians have been unaware, though some Christian historians have just been reluctant to admit that in the early Middle Ages, the Jews proselytized extensively and enjoyed considerable success. Evidence does not survive that allows anyone to guess at the extent of Jewish proselytism in Visigothic Spain, though Visigothic kings were repeatedly compelled to outlaw conversion. Bachrach is not alone in arguing that the Jewish question for the Visigothic kings was above all a political one. Jeremy Adams, oh crap, my mouth, oh okay, Jeremy Adams, in a little-known article that appeared independent of but correlative to Bacharach's paper, argued that the Visigothic kings were indeed inconsistent in their policy towards the Jews. Adams indicates that while the Jews were separated for specific condemnations, he believes that the Visigoths were essentially interested in establishing a homogeneous population loyal to the throne. Understandable. Although kings, because it causes civil wars, apparently, to not be homogeneous. Argue. Although kings achieved little, if any, success in this direction, the problem of the Jews represented not so much a religious as a political dilemma. The accusations of Jewish collaboration are intriguing. The earliest chronicles make no reference to the Jews. The first mention of them in Christian sources is not, in fact, until Lucas of Tuyes, it's like T-U-Y, Chronicle of the World in 1236. The Chronicle of the Moor Arazi, written in the mid-10th century. I need to increase the size of this. This is like teeny. So anyway, that Tui, I don't know how to say it, guy is the first chronicle to accuse the Jews of being traitors, writing more than 400 years after the event. Such an accusation likely tells one more about Lucas than it does about the historical events surrounding the Muslim conquest of Spain. The only extant source that truly may be labeled as primary for the Muslim invasion of Spain is a Christian one usually referred to as the Chronicle of 754, but occasionally as the Latin anonymous of Cordoba, Chronicle of Isidore Pacensis, or Chronicle of... This chronicler speaks so intimately of Cordoba and to a lesser extent Toledo that it is likely he once lived in both. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's like supposing whether, did they take over a place and then they cooperated, or did they straight up like conspire and be like, come on in, kill the Christians, The Controversy of Zion by Douglas Reed covers in part the history of the Sephardic Jews. Interesting book. Yes, and that's what they call the ones who were expelled, I believe. A lot of people think that they settled in the Ottoman Empire, but the Thomas Madden guy said that after they were expelled, they went mostly to, they went to Italy, and like some went to the Ottoman Empire. I forgot the other place they went. I think some went to Morocco. But anyway, I don't know. I was sort of just really kind of, because I don't know. I'm scared to play this video. I'm just gonna go for it, I guess. Why am I blanking on this guy's name? E. Michael Jones. E. Michael Jones. Okay. So I don't think I should play the whole video, but this just sort of goes into stuff that was going on during that time. It remains a fact that the Jews, either directly or through their co-religionists in Africa, encouraged the Mohammedans to conquer Spain. The death of the last Visigothic kings, victorious Arabs pushed onwards and everywhere supported by Jews. The Jewish revolutionary spirit.
The history of Jewish subversion in Spain could not be erased. There was too much evidence. Although they prospered under the Visigoths in Spain, they nevertheless conspired with Arabs in Africa to overthrow the Visigothic monarchy.
Why, though? Why would they?
At the beginning of the 8th century, they used their contacts with African Jews to prepare the invasion of the Mohammedan Berbers from North Africa across the Straits of Gibraltar. In 694, the 17th Council of Toledo proclaimed, quote, "The impious Jews dwelling within the frontiers of our kingdom have entered into a plot with those other Hebrews in regions beyond the seas in order that they might act as one against the Christian race."
Christian race.
In 852, the Annales Bertinianos described the loss of Barcelona because the Jews, quote, quote, played the traitor, unquote, allowing the Moors to capture it. As a result, quote, nearly all the Christians were killed, the city was devastated, and the Jews retired unpunished. When the Mohammedans conquered Spain, the Jews flourished, achieving one of the most sophisticated cultures in Europe. The Jews excelled in medicine and helped in bringing Aristotle to Europe. When the Spaniards began the Reconquista, the Jews were not persecuted despite further acts of bad faith. Block quote. St. Fernando, on taking Cordoba from the Saracens, turned over 4 mosques to the large Jewish population to convert into synagogues and gave them one of the most delightful parts of the city for their homes on 2 conditions: that they refrained from reviling the Christian religion and from proselytizing among Christians. The Jews made both promises and kept neither. Even as Islam was rolled back to North Africa, the Jews continued to collaborate with Muslims. Spanish Christians were persuaded that the Muslim invader had been welcomed by the Jews and assisted by them, with all this implied for the national and religious life of Spain. The Judeo-Muslim symbiosis that characterizes most of the Arab occupation gives considerable plausibility to the Christian view that in these 2 communities, alien both in faith and at law, Christendom faced an unfriendly alliance. Much of the civil order in Spain was enforced through canon law, but Jews, because they were not Christians, could not be touched by that law. Quote, the laws against blasphemy, for example, could not be enforced against them. They could encourage heresy, and in defense could claim the freedom of worship granted to the Jews. Jews were therefore allowed to engage in many subversive activities with impunity, which caused resentment. The reign of Pedro the Cruel pointed out a paradox that would recur. The more powerful the Jews grew, the more precarious their position became. Tolerance led to violence against the Jews because the Christian majority felt that Pedro the Cruel had given his Jewish retainers control of the government and carte blanche to oppress them culturally and financially. Jews, Walsh reminds us, quote, were disliked not for practicing the things that Moses taught, but for doing the things he had forbidden. They had profited hugely on the sale of fellow beings as slaves and practiced usury as a matter of course and flagrantly. They were also, quote, much given to proselytizing, even by a sort of compulsion. Thus they would force Christian servants to be circumcised and urge their debtors sometimes to abjure Christ. But the biggest problem was usury. As in the rest of Europe, Christians in Spain were forbidden to take interest on loans, thus granting a monopoly to Jews for a practice which, over a relatively short period, could concentrate all a nation's capital in their hands. Usury was the interface with Christian culture which caused the most resentment. In 1326, the Aljama of Cuenca, considering the legal rate of 33 1/3% too low, refused absolutely to lend either money or wheat for sowing. This caused great distress, and the town council entered into negotiations, resulting in an agreement by which the Jews were authorized to charge 40%.
That's a lot.
In 1385, the Cortes of Valladolid described one cause of the necessity of submitting to whatever exactions the Jews saw fit to impose when it says that the new lords, to whom Henry of Trastamara had granted towns and villages, were accustomed to impose on their vassals and starve and torture them to force payment of what they had not got, obliging them to get money from Jews, to whom they gave whatever bonds were demanded. Faced with either starvation or usury, the farmers and small businessmen of 14th century Spain chose usury and watched their prosperity drain into the hands of Jews. As later in Poland.
So this is sort of leading up to the riots of 1391. And I wanted a better explanation than what you get a lot of the time, which is just like, oh, anti-Semitism was spreading across Europe like a flock of birds, like a weather event, you know?
When he marched into Spain with an army of French mercenaries, the Jews were the first to suffer. Thousands of Jews were slaughtered. Many more took refuge in Paris, where the same cycle of usury leading to resentment started again.
I kind of skipped what I...
As one of his first official acts, Henry released Christians in his realm from their debts to the Jews. It was undoubtedly popular, but short-lived. Henry soon realized that if the Jews were unable to extort usurious interest, they couldn't pay taxes or lend the king money. Jews also possessed indispensable financial and administrative skills. Henry, who ascended to the throne on a tide of resentment against the Jews, employed the same Jews to remain financially solvent and administer his realm. The cycle of exploitation leading to resentment continued towards social upheaval. The resentment against usury combined with the suspicion that Jews were thwarting the Reconquista by controlling the reconquered regions with the secret help of the Moors to cause the riots of the late 14th century. When the monarchs did nothing to curb Jewish influence, the outraged citizens took the law into their own hands. On June 9, 1391, the storm finally broke.
There it is.
The uprising in Seville sacked the Juderia, and 4,000 Jews were killed. Those who were not killed saved their lives by submitting to baptism. The rioting then spread north, first to Cordova, then to Toledo and Burgos.
A lot of them were like hearing of the people coming, so they would just like, all right, baptize me.
Until all of Castile was swept into the vortex of anti-Jewish violence. Once a Jew submitted to baptism, he could walk unharmed through the very mob which only minutes before was determined to kill him. The fear of reprisal created an unfortunate spate of forced conversions, which compounded the problem of subversion that led to the riots and forced conversions in the first place. Unscrupulous politicians, seeing in forced conversion a quick fix to a difficult problem, ignored the warnings and created a deeper, more intractable problem. As the storm of anti-Semitism spread across Spain, small Jewish communities converted en masse. Given the forced nature of mass conversions of 1391, common rites, it was obvious that many could not have been genuine Christians. As a result, the conversos were regarded with suspicion as a fifth column within the church. Terms of opprobrium were applied to them, the most common being Marrano. The regimen of false conversions in Spain made a bad situation worse. The cynical Jewish converts continued to exploit the situation under the protection of the church, while the sincere Jewish converts lived under constant and intolerable suspicion. By the 1440s, it was clear that forced conversions had not solved Spain's Jewish problem. According to the Acts of the Financial Administration of Castile, Jews controlled about two-thirds of the indirect taxes and customs within the country, on the frontier, and at the ports. A whole network of Jewish tax farmers and collectors was spread over the entire kingdom. Their chief was a Jewish tax farmer general who acted as the king's treasurer. The wholesale conversion, says Walsh, seemed to have given to this opportunist type of Jew a chance to eat his cake and have it too. He could enjoy all the advantages of going to Mass on Sunday and going to the synagogue on Saturday. His children were barred from no profitable and honorable occupations. They could marry, thanks to his money, into noble impoverished families, as they would do in England, and succeed to the proudest titles in Castile. They could become priests, even bishops. The suspicions fell most heavily on the cultured conversos of the upper class, who benefited most from conversion by gaining access to offices previously off limits to Jews. The average Christian believed he was ruled by a class of philosophical intellectuals who were nihilists and opportunists with no religious beliefs. Morals deteriorated at the court, and the peasants groaned under their predations. This situation, Walsh says, could not go on indefinitely without an explosion, and unfortunately there were many explosions of the worst possible sort. The mob, seeing the government of Enrique el Impotente, Henry the Impotent, unwilling to do anything to curb the conversos, and virtually handing over to them the conduct of both state and church, took matters into their own hands. In one city after another, just before Queen Isabel came to the throne, the conversos were put to the sword and their houses burned. In 1453, after Constantinople fell to the Turks, the Christians feared a resurgence of Muslim influence in Spain, thwarting the Reconquista. In 1464, large numbers of conversos sailed for Constantinople, where they intended to revert to the religion of their fathers and give aid to the Turk Antichrist, who planned to march on Christian Europe and subdue it as the Moors had subdued Spain in the 8th century. Alfonso ascended the throne of Castile in 1467. When Alfonso entered Toledo in May of that year, open warfare broke out between the old Christians and the conversos. On July 2nd, a battle raged in Toledo for 3 days, during which 4 streets inhabited exclusively by conversos went up in flames. In 1469, Doña Isabella of Castile married Don Fernando, son of John II of Aragon. Ferdinand and Isabella tried to resolve the civil war that raged throughout Spain. The Jews were initially well disposed to the marriage. The Jews felt that a strong regime that maintained law and order would benefit them. But at least initially, Ferdinand and Isabella proved incapable of ending the civil war. There was also the matter of the Moors, who still occupied southern Spain, and who were suspected of being in league with the Jews. And there were also the recalcitrant nobles, who were a law unto themselves, pillaging and plundering at will. Isabella needed to reimpose law in her kingdom, but she also realized that military conquest was necessary before that could happen. In July 1477, Isabella came to Seville. During her stay, which lasted until October 1478, she was subjected to the sermons of Fray Alonso de Hojeda, the Dominican prior of Seville, who, quote, devoted all his energies to making the crown aware of the danger from Jews and false converts. The reports of Hojeda and the Bishop of Cadiz convinced her nearly all converts were secretly practicing Judaism. Logic dictated that she could not rely on her courts because they were staffed by conversos. Isabella was convinced radical measures were necessary. The only suitable instrument was the Inquisition, a legal body whose judges would be Dominican monks, quote, carefully chosen and beyond the reach of intimidation or bribery. In 1478, she sent a delegation to Pope Sixtus to procure the necessary bull. Less than 2 years later, Muhammad II, head of the newly vitalized Turkish forces in the former capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, ravaged the coast of Apulia in anger after failing to take the island of Rhodes. When the news arrived in Spain in mid-September, the threat of the resurgent Turk convinced Ferdinand and Isabella they could no longer vacillate. The Spanish Inquisition came into existence when Ferdinand and Isabella were dealing with long-standing and seemingly intractable civil war and anarchy. Creation of the Inquisition is an indication they saw Jews and Judaizers as central to both the Muslim problem in the territory yet to be conquered and the problem of anarchy in areas under their control. When the victorious Spanish army marched into Malaga after the successful campaign to drive the Moors from Spain, they found 400 Jews living there. Virtually all were Judaized Christians who had fled the Inquisition from Spain to Granada, where they reverted to Judaism. The apostates were ordered to decide whether they wanted to live completely as Christians or leave the country. Shortly after the royal couple entered Granada, they extended that option to all of Spain's Jews. On March 31st, 1492, while still in Granada, Ferdinand and Isabella signed the edict expelling the Jews from the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. As before, Jews could convert and remain, but the Inquisition had removed much of
Thomas Madden said that at this time, there were by now only about 80,000 Jews in Spain, and half of them, since they were given that option, did convert, and then half left, but a lot of them ended up coming back. So there's that.
The incentive to convert. Large numbers chose to leave. Their experience in Granada convinced the monarchs that a total separation was the only solution to the Jewish problem they identified. For some indication of what might have happened in Spain if the situation there had gone unchecked, we need only look at Poland. Jewish influence over Polish political life increased in intensity, fueling Polish imperialism in the East while weakening Polish rule at home.
I don't want to get off topic.
Polish laws were almost exclusively Portuguese New Christians. Antwerp
Okay, I'm gonna stop. Let's keep going. Wait, hold on. Whatever. That's enough of the Muslim invasion. Okay, here's the riots. We kind of went over that already. Anti-Jewish riots breaking out. They flee to the countryside. Blah blah blah. Yeah, they had been expelled from like England and France by then, I guess. In England, it was for coin clipping. Heresies in Spain. Arianism. Crypto-Judaism / conversos, also called Marranos. Protestantism actually never really got into Spain. They successfully kept it out. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because Spain was very like religiously diverse. Oh, it says, oh, and I shared this because I really just searching on the internet. I'm like, how many people were killed in the Spanish Inquisition? And here it says 32,000 executions. That's the History Channel. No, that's not correct. That's still just on the internet. It was actually over the course of hundreds of years, almost 300 years, it was only between 3,000 and 5,000. And most of those took place under Torquemada, probably like 2,000 within the first little time period. I guess he really went, he went for it. And he's just an interesting character. He slept on a board. He, as far as I know, he didn't seem particularly ambitious, but I've heard people, talk about him like, oh, he wanted to be like by the side of the queen. Like Isabel asked him to be her confessor and to be like their advisor, and he became the Grand Inquisitor. But anyway, 150,000 prosecuted. So these were just two different results that I just found on the internet like yesterday. But 3,000 to 5,000 is what I believe. That's what Thomas Madden says. Because again, killing people was not the goal. It was to, like I said before. Oh, and it was Torquemada who was pressuring the king and the queen to expel the Jews. And in 1490, 5 Jews and 6 conversos were accused of crucifying and murdering a Christian child in the village of LaGuardia. That's an interesting story, too, because, like, a lot of people agree that that was just, I don't know. I'm like, would Torquemada really just make that up? Because, I mean, he seemed like kind of like very serious about his religion. You would think that would be against his religion to just make up a fake story like that. But it's like there was nobody reported missing and there was no body. But I'm saying but a lot. When I was reading the Wikipedia here page about that, it was talking about how the guy had been arrested because like a consecrated host fell out of his clothing, and you're not supposed to have that. Apparently, it's like the thing you put on in your mouth. I was raised Mormon. Some people might not know, like the sacrament, consecrated host. And apparently people who wanted to do like rituals and stuff against the church or for whatever reason would try to steal these consecrated hosts. So that's why it was illegal for them to have these if they weren't authorized. It's illegal for them to be taken out of the cathedral, out of the church. And, oh, shoot. Well, hopefully I wasn't talking. I don't think I'm muted right now. So this guy, it falls out of his clothing and he gets arrested. And then it's right there on the Wikipedia page. Maybe I should pull it up. So Yusef Franco, aged 20, from Timblek, was also mentioned by Benito Garcia and then arrested by the Inquisition. It says he was visited by a doctor. Yusef asked the doctor if he could see a rabbi. In place of a rabbi, on his second visit, the doctor was accompanied by a converso friar, Alonso Enriquez, disguised as a rabbi and calling himself Abraham. I hope I'm not misunderstanding this, but this is the weird part. When asked why he thought he had been arrested, Yusef replied that he was accused of the ritual murder of a Christian boy. So again, nobody reported missing, but it is sort of weird. He's arrested for having a consecrated host on his person. It's like, it's like a cop pulling you over and being like, do you know why I pulled you over? And you're like, ritual murder I did a while back. You're like pulled over for speeding. I don't know he's saying he did do that, or if he's just thinking that's why he was arrested. It's kind of weird, you know. Brogan, guess what country stayed out of World War I mostly in World War II? Spain. Interesting. Yeah. It's so controversial, but I wish that the United States had stayed out of both of those as well. I'm anti-war. I just think we should have stayed out of it. Wish we could stay out of a lot of stuff. Okay, anyway, that I don't want to get too sidetracked, but that was like the child, even people who are like considered like anti-Semitic, you know, like this guy, he used to be like a pastor, I guess. What's he called? Even he says this is a made-up story by Torquemada. But isn't that a weird? Why would you say that when they ask you why you were arrested? Okay, anyway, just moving on. But what's he call it? Truth Hurts Radio. That guy. Okay. Thomas Madden. Oh, we got to get going. All right, next. All right, so this is talking about the Black Legend. That's what they call the bullshit that kind of goes on talking about the Inquisition that's just not very accurate. What is this? Talking about the auto da fe.
All right. Hello.
I don't know if I want to play that whole video. I sort of got sick of doing this and just started putting the whole videos on here. The Spanish Black Legend is a theorized historiographical tendency which consists of anti-Spanish and anti-Catholic propaganda. Its proponents argue that its roots date back to the 16th century when Spain's European rivals were seeking by political and psychological means to demonize the Spanish Empire, its people, and its culture, minimize Spanish discoveries and achievements, and counter its influence and power in world affairs. According to the theory, Protestant revolutionary propaganda published during the Hispano-Dutch War and the Anglo-Spanish War against the Catholic monarchs of the 16th century fostered an anti-Hispanic bias among subsequent historians, along with a distorted view of the history of Spain and the history of Latin America. Other parts of the world in the Portuguese Empire were also affected as a result of the Iberian Union and the Luso-Dutch Wars. Although the 17th century propaganda was based in real events from the Spanish colonization of the Americas, which involved atrocities, the theory of the Leyenda Negra suggests that it often employed lurid and exaggerated depictions of violence and ignored similar behavior by other powers. There were also Gothic novels that, you know, influenced like the Enlightenment and Voltaire. Voltaire had like all these horrible opinions about the Spanish Inquisition after reading this anonymous author who published a book that was like, where is that? Montanus? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Montanus. Sundry subtle practices of the Holy Inquisition of Spain under the pseudonym Reginaldus Gonzalvis Montanus. People don't know who wrote this. While authorship is disputed, it was probably written by Antonio del Corro. Oh, I didn't know that. And or Casiodoro de Reina, both previously Spanish Catholic monks who became Protestants and fled the Inquisition. The former was a theologian, close relative of an inquisitor and ferocious enemy of the Spanish Inquisition in its campaign to destroy Protestantism. The latter was a student of the Bible from childhood, later translating the Bible into Spanish. Montanus' text was brief, intelligently designed, and written in a lively and engaging style. It was simultaneously accurate about inquisitional practices and misleading, taking some of the most extreme of inquisitional practices as the norm. Montanus portrayed every victim of the Inquisition as innocent, every Inquisition official as venal and deceitful, and every step in its procedure as a violation of natural and rational law. So anyway, I think that's what Voltaire read, and that's what was informing his opinions about it. He said stuff about how horrible the Inquisition was. But okay, why did I put this here? What is this?
Witchcraft of the sort that is referred to in Monty Python, in any case, was virtually unknown in the Middle Ages.
Well, we're not going back to the Middle Ages. Sorry. Heidi, what are you doing? There's that picture. Yeah. There's Torquemada. Tomas, oh God, I hate this bald head. Why? Why would you ever do that? And just shave the whole thing. I'm sorry. It's just very silly. Okay, so this picture is interesting. There's this guy here, I believe. He's like a Jewish guy. I think the Jewish people considered him kind of like a hero kind of thing. Basically, he was like trying to bribe. This is France. This is Ferdinand and Isabella. So Torquemada like ran in while this guy was trying to like basically offer them money to keep them from expelling the Jews. And he like threw a cross down on the Torquemada threw a there's the cross. Torquemada threw a cross down. Damn it, let me grab the quote. He called them Judas. It says, when the Jews were ordered banished by the Catholic monarchs of Spain with the Alhambra decree, Torquemada, or no, not Torquemada, Abarbanel, that's the other guy's name, did all in his power to induce the king to revoke the edict. He unsuccessfully offered the king 30,000 ducats, which is $68,400 nominal value. Several times during the mid to late 15th century, he is talking about Abarbanel, Isaac Abarbanel, personally spent large amounts of his personal fortunes to bribe the Catholic monarchs to permit the Jews to remain in Spain. Abarbanel is claimed to have offered them 600,000 crowns for the revocation of the edict. Ferdinand also is said to have hesitated, but was prevented from accepting the offer by Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, who dashed into the royal presence and throwing a crucifix down before the king and queen, asked whether, like Judas, they would betray their lord for money. In the end, Abarbanel only managed to get the date for the expulsion to be extended by 2 days. There it is, 2 hours in before Monty Python are mentioned. I know. Every time you search that, it's like, nobody expects the Inquisition. I actually pulled that up just today because I hadn't seen that. I was like, why do I keep running into this? Let's skit. So, no bribes. Sorry. Expulsion goes through as planned. Okay, that's what I just read. That's Isaac Abarbanel. And apparently then he went on to become Santa Claus. Just kidding. Okay, what is this? Now this is all out of order. This is talking about the 1391 riots again. Okay, so all the Jews had to leave by August 2nd, 1492. This is the same date as Christopher Columbus going to America, so that's kind of interesting. Half converted and could keep their property and remain, and the other half went to Italy, North Africa, but many returned to Spain because they didn't like where they went. They returned and got baptized. The crown lost some revenue, but not a lot. It says 160,000 left. Ferdinand died in 1517, and he was succeeded by his grandson Charles, who 2 years later is elected Holy Roman Emperor. Ferdinand and Charles both agreed that converso money was bribing people in high positions trying to water down the Inquisition. Well, probably because he was being offered bribes himself. And I have something here. This is from the audiobook. I just wanted to play a little bit. It's on like high speed because I was trying to listen to this fast last night.
The old Christians started in the mid to late 15th century writing tracts that accused the conversos of being part of a Jewish plot, a very widespread conspiracy to infiltrate the Spanish nobility and the Catholic Church and then destroy it from within. They pointed out that many of the people who were of the highest levels in the church, in the royal courts, and who were even marrying into the highest families in Spain were conversos. And that this was all part of this big plot to destroy Christian society, destroy the Spanish nobility and the Catholic Church from within. Of course, for this to be true, that would mean that all of the conversos would have to have been in on the plot, and that means that they
Hold
were not
on. No, they don't all have to have been in on it for it to have been true. I don't know why he said that. I disagree.
sincere Christians, but actually secret Jews. Now, there's no evidence before the Inquisition for any such thing, and even evidence that was brought out during the first phases of the Inquisition itself was extremely poor and almost always very old. Interestingly, though, many modern writers have embraced what were essentially just hackneyed anti-Semitic theories. It's not uncommon today to read that the conversos really were secret Jews trying to hold on to their ancient faith under Catholic tyranny. But a very large amount of scholarly research that's been done on this question shows that there's absolutely no reason to believe that that was the case. And quite the contrary, the overwhelming weight of evidence is that virtually all of the conversos were sincere Catholics. The Spanish Inquisition, therefore, came about to deal with this problem, because an increasing number of the old Christians and the nobility were going to the king and trying to use these arguments to harm the conversos. And so in 1480, the crown decided to investigate the charges that the conversos were really secret Jews. The Pope, Sixtus IV, was asked to confirm this, and so in a bull of November 1st, 1478, he allowed the Spanish crown to set up an inquisition of 2 or 3 priests over the age of 40. And the power over the Inquisition was given to the crown to either appoint or dismiss further inquisitors. It doesn't seem that Ferdinand was that worried about it. In fact, 2 years went by before he even appointed anyone, and it was definitely a very small operation at first, but it set off a tinderbox. Conversos had a lot of enemies, and enemies of them came out of the woodwork, and they got it from both sides. The old Christians, of course, were the ones who had made the original charges, and so they were the first ones to come out and claim that they were secret Jews. But they also had a number of Jewish enemies too, who, as we talked about, saw the conversos as apostates. The inquisitors quickly found themselves overwhelmed by accusers, so they asked for and received more helpers. Soon there were tribunals set up all over Castile, and it was growing rapidly. It was snowballing. Executions of conversos, although very limited, nevertheless frightened many others who now worried because the rules of evidence were not being used in these tribunals. Almost anything, any denunciation was being accepted as evidence of guilt. Soon there were tribunals across Castile, and it was growing rapidly. Executions of the conversos, although limited, frightened many who fled. The more the inquisitors looked, it seemed like the more they found. And Ferdinand, who was himself shocked at what came about, as were many others, ordered that it be spread into Aragon and elsewhere. It was getting out of hand. Although Ferdinand and most of the inquisitors, who had no real legal training, appeared to have sincerely believed all the rumor and innuendo and false testimonies they were hearing, they could not see that it was the Inquisition itself that was whipping up the hysteria. The Pope, Sixtus IV, tried to put a stop to it. On April 18th, 1482, he wrote to Ferdinand saying that, quote, "In Aragon, Valencia, Majorca, and Catalonia, the Inquisition has for some time been moved not by zeal for the faith and the salvation of souls, but by lust for wealth, and that many true and faithful Christians, on the testimony of enemies, rivals, slaves, and other lower and even less proper persons, have without any legitimate proof been thrust into secular prisons, tortured, and condemned as relapsed heretics, deprived of their goods and property, and handed over to the secular arm to be executed, to the peril of souls, setting a pernicious example and causing disgust to many." Sixtus demanded that local bishops be involved in the future tribunals, and that the accused be given counsel, and also that the right of appeal to Rome be honored. Ferdinand was not happy to get that letter. He, in fact, was outraged. He had for some time been hearing stories about these conspiracy stories about how the conversos, because of their great wealth, had been trying to bribe any officials they could to avoid being caught by the Inquisition. And he was now certain that they had bribed the Pope as well. He wrote back to the Pope, "Things have been told me, Holy Father, which, if true, would seem to merit the greatest astonishment. To these rumors, however, we have given no credence, because they seem to be things which would in no way have been conceded by your Holiness, who have a duty to the Inquisition. But if by chance concessions have been made through the persistent and cunning persuasion of the conversos, I intend never to let them take effect. Take care, therefore, not to let the matter go further, and to revoke any concessions, and entrust to us the care of this question." Well, the days of a pope being able to enforce such things as this were over. Sixtus accepted that Ferdinand had the matter in hand and allowed him to continue. There was nothing he could do to make him stop. On October 17th, 1483.
Okay, well, I just wanted to play that because I don't know, it's not really a conspiracy that people were trying to bribe people, but, you know, I don't know. He accused the Pope of accepting bribes. Okay, I don't know. Let's just get on with it. Reasons for expulsion. Oh yeah. So Castile and Aragon are the two kingdoms that were united by Ferdinand and Isabel being married, and it's kind of interesting. Usury was only mentioned in the Aragonese version of the expulsion decree. I could not find that anywhere online. I was trying to find it and I couldn't. Spain kicked out the Jews and Muslims, says Jack, and then conquered most of the Americas. Funny how that works. Yeah, it's called the Golden Age of Spain. I've got a page for that. They were like one of the very first like big, huge empires like that, I guess. Or something. Jews are accused of heretical depravity, that is, of serving as an example and inciting the convert to return to the practices of his ancient religion. The beginning of the decree, it is said that it is well known that in our dominions there are some bad Christians who have Judaized and committed apostasy. Oh, Judaizers. I know. Archie's always sitting in the window Judaizing. I'm like, stop it! Against the Holy Catholic faith, the majority being caused by relations between Jews and Christians. Measures taken up to that point by the monarchs to put an end to communication between the Jewish community and the converts, a fundamental cause of the new Christians Judaizing, according to the monarchs and the Inquisition, are as follows. The first was the agreement of the Cortes of Toledo. I don't want to read all this. I don't know. There's a lot of like debate about what exactly they were like. What was the problem? Why are they expelling them? And oh God, Netanyahu. So Netanyahu, it's the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, the freaking psychopath. Benjamin, they have the same name. But so anyway, his theory is interesting because he like connects it to Germany, 1930s Germany. He says that his theory is that the conversos were sincere Christians and they were being persecuted out of racial hatred, and that it was like the first time of this happening, and then it like I guess made a resurgence in Germany later on or something. He like connected. Maybe I should just read this. Netanyahu wrote a book about essays of Spanish and Marranos. He developed the theory according to which the Marranos converted to Christianity not under compulsion, but out of a desire to integrate into Christian society. However, as new Christians, they continued to be persecuted due to racism, not purely for religious reasons as previously believed. He argued that what was new in the 15th century was the Spanish monarchy's practice of defining Jews not religiously but racially by the principle of limpieza de sangre. I'm sorry, I don't know Spanish. Purity of blood, which served as a model for 20th century racial theories. Netanyahu rejected the idea that the Marranos lived double lives, claiming that this theory arose from Inquisition documents. Netanyahu is perhaps best known for his magnum opus, Origins of the Inquisition in 15th century Spain. His publisher and friend, Jason Epstein, wrote of the book, the 1,400-page work of scholarship overturned 20 centuries of misunderstanding, and predictably it was faintly praised and in a few cases angrily denounced or simply ignored by a threatened scholarly establishment. Dispassionate scholars soon prevailed, and today Benzian's brilliant revisionist achievement towers over the field of Inquisition studies. So this was actually from someone like critiquing this Netanyahu theory. It was from the Oons Review, which is another no-no website that, you know, I hope I don't get in trouble for mentioning. Ron Oons. Scholarly dispute with Yitzhak Bar considered the Anusim forced converts to Christianity. Yeah. By the way, you're not supposed to force people to convert. I don't know if I even need to mention that, but like, according to Christianity's own thing, you're not really supposed to be doing that. But you know, I was trying to get way too into. I'm tired of this. Yeah, I did a lot of that. Let's not. Let's just get on with it. Okay, and then the Moriscos are the Muslims. Then they expelled the Moriscos. During the Christian reconquest of Muslim Spain, surrendering Muslim communities in Aragon, Valencia, and Granada were usually guaranteed freedom of religion by treaty. This tolerant policy was abandoned in the late 15th century when Christian authorities began to make conversions and ordered the destruction of Islamic theological books. The Muslims of Granada rebelled. In 1502, offered the choice of baptism or exile. Many of them were baptized and continued to practice Islam secretly. In 1526, the Muslims of Valencia and Aragon were similarly forced to convert. Thereafter, Islam was officially prohibited in Spain. The Moriscos, however, did not prove to be assimilable. Though they were racially indistinguishable from their old Christian neighbors, Christians who had retained their faith under Muslim rule, they continued to speak, write, and dress like Muslims. The old Christians suspected the Moriscos of abetting the Algerians and the Turks, both enemies of Spain, and were fearful of their holy wars, jihads, which terrorized whole districts, subjected to discriminative taxation, while their staple industry, the silk trade, was reduced by a misguided fiscal policy, ill-taught in their new faith, yet punished for ignorance by church and Inquisition. The Moriscos turned outside Spain for Muslim support. They obtained legal opinions, fatwas, that assured them that it was permissible to practice Islam in secret, taqiyya. Then produced books known as al-Jamiatos, written in Spanish using the Arabic alphabet to instruct fellow Moriscos in Islam. In 1566, Philip II issued an edict forbidding the Granada Moriscos their language, customs, and costume. They revolted in 1569. After 2 years of war, they were removed en masse from Granada and scattered throughout northern Spain. Evidence of their continued political and religious infidelity led to a royal order for deportation on September 22nd, 1609. Their expulsion was completed some 5 years later. An estimated 300,000 Moriscos relocated mainly in Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, where again they found themselves an alien element. They were assimilated after several generations, but something of their Spanish heritage has survived in modern times. All right, Spanish Golden Age. Spain's Golden Age, Siglo de Oro, began in the late 1400s with the marriage of Catholic royals Isabella and Ferdinand, which united the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. Oh, there's only one L in Castile, my bad. Over the next 2 centuries, Spain became a mighty empire through marriage, alliance, conquest, and war. The Golden Age was a period of flourishing arts and literature that lasted from 1492 to 1700. It was characterized by patriotic and religious fervor, heightened realism, and a new interest in earlier epics and ballads, along with the influences of humanism and Neoplatonism. Hey, I like Neoplatonism. This was sort of leading into the Renaissance, I believe. The period was coinciding with the political rise and decline of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty and was characterized by, innovative Renaissance genres such as the sonnet and revitalizing traditional Spanish genres like the Romance. The greatest patron of Spanish art and culture during this period was King Philip II, whose royal palace El Escorial invited the attention of some of Europe's greatest architects and painters such as El Greco, who infused Spanish art with foreign styles and helped create a uniquely Spanish style of painting. All right. Oh God, this is so much. This is just, Portuguese Inquisition. This is sort of I shouldn't say it's funny. It was a long time ago. It is kind of funny to me so the Lisbon massacre started this on Sunday, April 19th, 1506 in Lisbon, when a crowd of churchgoers attacked and killed several people in the congregation whom they suspected were Jews. The violence escalated in a citywide anti-Semitic riot that killed as many as 4,000 new Christians. Here it is. Okay, the massacre began in the Church of St. That's not what I was saying was funny. You'll see. Hold on. The faithful were praying for an end to the drought and plague that were sweeping the country when several worshippers claimed they saw a strange light emanating from a crucifix in the chapel of Jesus. Word of the apparent miracle spread, and soon the church was packed with a great crowd that included German and French sailors from trading ships in the harbor. The crowd became incensed when a new Christian ridiculed the claims of a miracle. So, yeah, I mean, it's just sort of funny. It's sort of like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode in a weird way. Like, he's like, no, it's not a miracle. It's just like coming through. The sun is shining through that window. That light is. And then they got really mad and freaked out and killed a bunch of people. A fight broke out in the church and the man was killed along with other new Christians who were present. The mob spilled out of the church and began killing any new Christian they came across. They built a pyre on the church square and threw the bodies of their victims into the fire. I'm just going to keep moving along here. Oh, God. Now we're Martin Luther. I don't have time for this. He didn't use a hammer. This has a picture of him hammering his 95 Thesis to the door there. He probably just used glue, just for the record, but it's kind of a dramatic image, I suppose. I can't get too much into this, but he started doing Protestantism. He's got that horrible hairdo. He was one of the very first overnight celebrities due to the printing press. In 1566, Luther's Conversations were published. Among many other similar affirmations, he is quoted as saying, "The Spanish eat white bread with pleasure and kiss white women with pleasure, but they are as dirt brown and tar black as King Balthasar and his monkeys." I don't know why I felt the need to highlight that. It was a quote he said. So he's going against the Catholic Church. So he is moving into the Roman Inquisition. We're almost done here. I don't have too much time. I can't do this. But the main problem they were addressing with the Roman Inquisition was the Protestants. And they at least tried to sort of like gather and like come to agreements about certain things before. I don't know how successful that was, but oh yeah, so Luther called the Catholic Church the whore of Babylon, the Antichrist, and then he was like kind of cornered in a debate with some other guy, I forgot. He said the Bible is the only authority, and he had like the support and protection of some like secular German princes after becoming an outlaw. He was excommunicated by the Catholic Church. So while Luther was reading a passage of Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verse 17, he had his 15:18 revelation that the just shall live by faith. He decided, we are not saved by doing good works, like you should do good works, yes, but we are saved only by our faith, and he believes in the authority of the Bible alone. Human beings are utterly incapable of obeying the commandments that God gave them. You should still try to, but, you know, they exist to prove to us that we are incapable of ever earning heaven. And he was really upset about indulgent cells. He felt like it was like selling salvation. And the church's cardinals, their wealth, he thought they were very pompous and showy and extravagant and like, yeah. October 31st, 1517, Luther posts his 95 Theses. The printing press made him the first literary celebrity. His ideas spread rapidly and then morphed. I already said that. The Catholic Church by this time was 15 centuries old. They respond to the heresy. They tell Luther to recant. He refuses. Pope Leo X sends him a papal bull on June 15th, 1520, giving him 60 days to recant. It was called Ex Surge Domine, and he would be excommunicated if he didn't. Luther's supporters in Germany burned the papal bull. And then Luther wrote something called Against the Execrable Bull of the Antichrist. Luther responds by pamphlet. Pope Leo excommunicated Luther on January 13th, 1521, making Luther legally an outlaw. And then his German secular lords begin seizing church property, and then there's widespread peasant revolts across Germany. So Luther's doing that. There's the papal bull, Ex Surge Domine. This is a painting that was a big deal because it had to be redone. I don't know. It was an interesting story, but I don't have time. These people were all naked, but they had to be redone and covered with some clothing and stuff. And there were some people that thought it might have been sort of subversive because there was some weird stuff in there. It's interesting to look into. It's called, is it called The Last Judgment, I think? Anyway, I don't have time. Another heresy for the Roman Inquisition was humanism. Erasmus of Rotterdam. He developed a biblical humanistic theology in which he advocated tolerance, concord, and free thinking on matters of indifference. He remained a member of the Catholic Church all his life, remaining committed to reforming the church from within. He promoted the traditional doctrine of synergism, which some prominent reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin rejected in favor of the doctrine of monergism. I don't know what the... His middle road approach disappointed and even angered partisans in both camps. I don't know if humanism was like technically ever officially declared heresy, but it was sort of getting close. He was a Renaissance humanist. More specifically, he was this is talking about Calvinism, John Calvin. He was a Christian anthropological humanist. His anthropological humanism is rich and complex. Calvin, I'm getting tired. Whatever, humanism. What is this? Erasmus, okay. Oh, okay, just real quick. There's this whole thing with Galileo, right? So geocentricity says the Earth is the center of the universe, and heliocentricity is the sun is the center of the universe. So Nicholas Copernicus came up with that. Both are incorrect. So anyway, a lot of I was one of the people who thought that Galileo had been put to death by the Catholic Church, by the Inquisition, for being correct scientifically about something, and it actually isn't even really true. It's one of those things he was Copernicus released his theory, and it was only mildly noticed by the Catholic Church. They were like, well, all right. And then Galileo came along, and he really seized upon it, and he started writing about it, but he was veering too much into theology and trying to incorporate it into theology instead of just sticking to science. And that's what the church had a problem with and also he was being really insulting and rude and disrespectful, basically, kind of calling people stupid if they didn't agree with him, and just overstepping his boundaries of the time. And I guess I should just read this. Nicholas Copernicus' book, The Revolution of the Spheres, published in 1543, was not immediately condemned. In fact, the book was dedicated to Pope Paul III, who was very interested. Popes had the papal observatory in Rome, where the Jesuits worked to map out the skies. They were very interested in the whole thing. Sun is at the center of the universe. Earth revolves around it. Not considered heretical, just ideas. Protestants did condemn it. The Jesuits in Rome eventually rejected Copernicus because the model did not work. It did not better predict what people saw in the sky. Didn't work any better than the geocentric model. Jesuits were more into the Kepler model, which didn't work very well either. It didn't predict any better. So Galileo uses the telescope and sees all kinds of things up there, that the heavens are not perfect, sees mountains on the moon, sees phases of Venus and moons around Jupiter, and really embraces Copernicus. He rejects the Aristotelian model, thinks the tides prove him right, and comets, even though totally false. Galileo did not like to be disagreed with. Galilei, tried by Roman Inquisition in 1633, Galileo starts writing about theology, trying to prove the Copernicus system is true. That's why he runs into the Inquisition. He had good friends in high places, and Roman Inquisition had a soft touch. He was cleared twice. What he said wasn't clearly heretical. He was just being a dick, that's all. 1615, perfectly acceptable for Catholics to accept Copernicus as a working hypothesis that the Earth goes around the sun. Galileo is told, do science, leave theology to the theologians. Galileo doesn't do that and is brought up again to the Inquisition. He's told to prove Copernicus was right or stop bothering the church with all his theological writings. Galileo refused to do so. He's told to no longer hold or defend the theory of Copernicus. He writes something derisive and mocking of those who disagree with him, and he's ordered to stand trial. He was housed in a luxurious apartment overlooking the Vatican gardens, had his own valet. He was never tortured. Okay, so whatever. I think he was cleared again, and that's that. He went and lived off the rest of his life. So that's just another misconception, a common myth about, okay, Joan of Arc. She was prosecuted by a pro-English church court at Rouen, Normandy in 1431. The court found her guilty of heresy, and she was burned at the stake. The verdict was later nullified at Jones' rehabilitation trial, which was overseen by the Inquisitor General. Okay, so I just grabbed this from Quora. So I thought it was interesting. You know, sometimes people say things on there that's interesting. So this person said, sometimes this is the main accusation of anti-Catholics towards the Catholic Church regarding the case of Joan of Arc. If you knew the political situation during this time, you will know why. Galileo, first example of get in your lane. Yeah. Stay in your lane, Galileo. So during Joan of Arc's time, there are two things that are happening. One is the Western Schism, where there were 2 or 3 popes who each claimed to be the true one. The Council of Constance, who ended the Western Schism, probably saying that schism, and the 100 Years' War between England and France. If you read the trial of St. Joan of Arc, she wanted to appeal to the Pope, but her judges refused. Yeah, so like in Rome, they were trying to get her to be sent to them, and they definitely probably, I don't think they would have killed her, but it was like this weird rogue judge. She was asked which pope she is recognizing as true. She said the one in Rome, Avignon, or Pisa. She said the one in Rome, an indication of the political situation of the church during the time. Another thing is that if you read her rehabilitation case, you will know that her judges acted on their own authority and in the authority of the English king, not on the authority of the Pope of Rome. They did not even give reference to the Pope in the trial, nor do they follow the proper procedure of canon law. They acted on their own and violated canon law by refusing to give Joan a counsel and allowing her to appeal to Rome. They didn't allow her to appeal. At that moment, the trial is never sanctioned by the Catholic Church because it was not authorized by the Pope. Bishop Pierre, I don't know how to say that, Cachan, and the other bishops, together with the Inquisitor, were controlled puppets of the English, and they are really determined to punish Joan of Arc for frustrating the plans of the English king of being crowned the King of France. In other words, it was the English-controlled prelates who are guilty of killing Joan of Arc, not the Catholic Church, because they judged him on... Why is she saying him? Judged her on their own terms and on the terms of the English king, not on the terms of the Catholic Church. Okay, whatever. Black Legend. We're pretty much done debunking the Black Legend. It was to discredit Spain, the leading European power in the 16th century. Other powers of the time were conspiring to usurp its place, and eventually they succeeded. Thus, it was the bourgeois, of the other colonial powers which invented the Black Legend. The legend was a skillful ideological weapon in the intercolonial power struggle which accompanied the rise of capitalism and was to last several centuries, although by the end of the 17th century, the outcome was virtually decided in favor of the new colonial powers. In any case, it is important to remember that there were not one but two cultures in Spain, as in any other country, a ruling class culture and a popular one, a culture of the oppressors and the oppressed. I don't know where I got this. The latter culture was a living and authentic one, and it is this which we Spanish Americans stand for. Okay. Where did my, damn it, the cursor disappeared. Freaking hell. What do I do? That'd be hilarious. I can see it over here on this other screen. Oh, wonderful. Watch me like not even be able to end the stream now because the light is on. What is going on? I should have stopped a long time ago before I had problems. I don't know. Do I need batteries? Look, the light is on. So it's plugged in. Frickin' hell. Hold on. I don't know why it suddenly stopped working. put it in there. Nope. What is happening? I don't even know what to do if I can't like end the stream. Ugh, what a nightmare. I swear this happens like. Wait. Oh. Oh, this is great. Okay, what if I have no idea. Why did it just suddenly stop working? I seriously have no clue what to do now. Light is still on. I just changed the batteries. Very strange. Is my computer just freezing? Show us Archie. He's over on that chair over there. Hold on just one sec. I'm going to see if I can. I think it's just like freezing. Okay, I'll go grab him. I don't know how to stop. Come here, kitty. Maybe if I just give it a minute. I have no idea. There he is. He's like all annoyed. Sorry. You were sleeping. He really likes that chair over there. What do I do? When will Archie pay for his war crimes? I wish I could put your comment on the screen, but I can't. What am I just stuck, like, doing this? I don't know how to end it. I guess I would just close the computer, right? Archie. Oh, I'm going to put him back. He was sleeping. Oh, okay. Well, I'm a little perturbed. I'm covered in fur. I don't understand why that happened. Oh, dude, I'm an idiot. Can I use this? The laptop? It's like the whole thing is just like frozen now. Stop sharing. End stream. I don't know. All right. Well, I'm just going to try closing the laptop, I guess. It's just like there's nothing. I don't know what's going on here. It's just taking a crap. It's like everything just froze up. All right. Well, anyway, thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Permanent stream. Destined to continue for all time. Yeah, I wanted to get to the last page. It says the end, you know, but press escape. All right. Escape. Jeez. What the hell? A pain in the ass. All right. Well, anyway, that was the Inquisitions, and yeah, the end. I'm just gonna close it. It's like totally not even responding. Wait a minute. No. Like, totally non-responsive here. Completely non-responsive. Yeah. I don't know. That's pretty stupid. Improvise. Just like start playing the harmonica. Well, there was this book. This isn't really related to the topic, but it was a book by King James. I think it's the same King James as the one who did the Bible, but this is more regarding witch hunting, demonology. And I didn't even actually read it yet, but he was kind of funny. Apparently he was obsessed with like witches and ghouls and spooks and ghosts and stuff. And I wish that didn't happen. Is it the laser? Like, I have no idea. Okay, I'm just going to end it. I'm just going to close the laptop, I guess. Maybe just push the button off and have a good night. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully it actually ends.